The Mets are talking to the top reliever available. Could another Yankee be coming to Citi Field? And what's going on with Pete Alonso? Welcome back into another edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie back with you once again. Feels like it has been forever since we've done a pod, but holidays and travel schedules and just getting everything back on track. We are back in the saddle. We are ready to go for the remainder of this offseason, and the Mets have given us a lot to come back to. Jack, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Chris. A lot of rumors to talk about, but not a lot of actual news so far with these New York Mets in the last, or since we've last recorded.
I've got some actual news for you. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball to NHL and UFC. BetOnline is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. The tagline there, the game starts here. We're going to start with the close. We're going to start with the closer market because I'm surprised by this, but the Mets had a meeting, had conversations, are probably still having ongoing conversations with the top closer available. I think for all intents and purposes, the top reliever available before the offseason began. He remains unsigned, that being former Marlin and Padre Tanner Scott. So, Jack, the Mets, we know they're going to be in the market for bullpen help. We know how David Stearns likes to shop for bullpen help. It's not necessarily at the top end of the market, yet they met with Tanner Scott. Your initial thoughts?
This would be quite the signing for the New York Metropolitans, Chris. That's my initial thoughts. If you go over to his Baseball Savant or StatCast page, there's a whole lot of red. It looks like, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the rapper's name, but a lot of red for Tanner Scott here with pitching run value, fastball run value. His average exit velocity is 100th percentile. His hard hit percentage is 99th percentile. Obviously, he had a great season last year with an ERA below 2, able to accumulate 22 saves, 1.13 whip. This is an interesting move for the Mets, especially given what some of Edwin Diaz's struggles look like last year. I don't know if this is an insurance in case they need to flip Diaz rather into a setup role and make Tanner Scott the closer. I don't know what their plan would be with Scott initially. I assume it would be set up and let Diaz close, but yeah, I mean, you said it, Chris. This has not been what David Stearns' MO has been in the past with this team and with the Brewers and guaranteeing relievers multi-year contracts, but you have to assume the number one guy available in that market would earn a multi-year, probably heftier deal for, again, a closer and the top one on the market.
I think it was a story or a tweet discussing that David Stearns doesn't give out multi-year major league contracts to relievers. Just like hasn't done it. There's like one example since he's taken over as president of baseball ops GM, and this goes back to his time with the Brewers, that this is not what he does. Think about the bullpen makeup of last year. They were either players that were already here or they were minor league signings that ultimately then came to the big league roster. Like if David Stearns was in charge, Edwin Diaz never gets the deal that he gets from the New York Mets, right? And so this is an end of the pool. This is the deep end of the pool that I don't think any of us thought that the Mets were going to be playing in. But what I think it tells you, one, I don't think this happens. I think Tanner Scott gets a lengthier deal than the Mets are willing to give him for more money and he goes someplace else. But what this tells you is no matter what the public stance is, no matter we don't give long-term contracts out to pitchers, we don't give relievers multi-year contracts. Juan Soto is the exception to what we are willing to do budget-wise. The Mets under David Stearns are always going to just sniff around. They're always just going to see. Because if there's a chance to make the Sean Manaea deal, they'll do the Sean Manaea deal. If there's a chance to get somebody on a 1 or 2 year contract that fits more in line with the way that they want to build, then they'll offer a high AAV like the reported 3-year, $90 million deal to Pete Alonso. They will, despite maybe a player and their reported contract demands maybe being square peg round hole, the Mets will try to find the square peg for the square hole. They will try to find a way to make something fit. And so that is the thing I appreciate the most about this. I mean, look, we've said this before in the past. When Edwin Diaz's contract comes up with the club option, they're going to decline that option. That's just not the way David Stearns does things, and the way he builds bullpens, he just rotates guys in and out. So until somebody of Tanner Scott's caliber or a top-tier closer caliber player gets signed by David Stearns, I'll believe it when I see it. But I like what this says about what the New York Mets are doing. I like what this says about the way that they are approaching this offseason. They understand that there needs to be another reliever brought into this team. They need another high-leverage reliever, and this would check two boxes. High-leverage reliever late in games, but also a shutdown lefty that you can put in there. I'm intrigued by one thing. Do you still have a StatCast page still up?
I do, Chris.
What does StatCast say his repertoire is, his pitch mix?
It is just two pitches, a four-seamer and a slider.
Okay, so I'm a recent convert. I used to be a StatCast guy. I am now a pitcher list guy. I have been converted. So pitcher list has him at last year 59% four seam, 41% slider usage, but it has a sinker at 0% usage, meaning that he's had a sinker in the past and they
That
have
is
it
correct.
identified as much. So I wanted to see if StatCast and pitcher list matched in the repertoire. So a two-pitch pitcher, a four-seamer, and a slider. Maybe he throws a sinker if he comes here to the New York Mets. Look, I'd have to see the numbers. I think giving a closer any more than 3 years is probably a dangerous game. You're flirting with disaster. I mean, the Mets signed Edwin Diaz to that 5-year deal, and he immediately missed a season. Like, they signed him to a 5-year deal, and he immediately missed the next season. Now, World Baseball Classic aside, but he missed a year immediately on that 5-year deal. So you have to be careful with this kind of stuff. I wouldn't be against it if the numbers made sense. He was a pitcher that was elite percentile-wise across the board amongst relievers. So he would fit this team. They need another reliever. It's just something that I'll believe it when I see it. Now, a rumor that I believe a little bit more than this one, and that's not so much a rumor because they did meet with him, I just don't think they get it over the finish line, is that they are apparently poking around at adding another Yankees outfielder. They are just going to poach 2/3 of the Yankees outfield from a season ago because after signing Juan Soto, it appears as if they are intrigued by the idea of bringing in Alex Verdugo. And, Jack, my initial thoughts when I saw this rumor is you've got too many outfielders as it is. I mean, we're going to do a pod. The next episode up that we're going to do are the 5 prospects for both of us that can have the biggest impact in 2025. And I have an outfielder as one of my 5 because I think he's the first guy up on the list if something happens. If you add Alex Verdugo to this mix, that he moves way down the board for me. They have Juan Soto. They have Brandon Nimmo. They have Tyrone Taylor. They have Jose Siri. They have Starling Marte. They have Luis Angel Acuna, who could potentially be moved to the outfield. They have Jeff McNeil, who has played in the outfield. They have too many outfielders. So I look at this and I go, Alex Verdugo brings good defense. He had a bad offensive year last year. He didn't hit for as much power or doubles power as I think the Yankees thought they were signing up for when they brought him into the lineup. Where's he going to play? How often is he going to play? What's the cost? There's just a lot of questions about this, and this just doesn't feel like a natural fit. Like, Tanner Scott's a natural fit. Money aside, Tanner Scott fits into a role that the Mets have. Do the Mets have a hole in their outfield? Nimmo and Soto are in the corners, and you're going to rotate between Taylor and Siri in center. Like, that's the makeup of this team right now. What do they need? Now, does this suffice the lefty bat that they want? If that's the case, I think there are better bats out there. Alex Verdugo is coming off of a pretty bad 2024 campaign.
I think when I look at the Verdugo rumors as well as the Tanner Scott rumors, we have to remember, first and foremost, that these are just rumors, right? Mm-hmm. The Mets sniffing around on players does not necessarily mean anything as far as momentum towards signing them. I think with Scott and with Verdugo here, a lot of what the Mets are trying to do here in January is figure out what their markets are looking like. And if they think that they can bring in Verdugo as extra depth, like you mentioned, he's a much better defensive player than he is offensive player, which fits right in with David Stearns' entire philosophy building a team. You know, look at the Jose Siri trade from earlier this offseason. It's the exact same sort of thing. Is Verdugo going to be signable for essentially a bargain price? Like, could they even sign him to potentially a minor league deal? Could he be someone that they just want to add as even more depth? And then you have to also think about the Soto part of the equation, obviously, as another corner outfielder that, by the way, Chris is on the Mets for 2025 and beyond.
It's big breaking news.
But when you look at what Soto brings and what Verdugo brings, it's kind of like they balance each other out almost, right? Because Soto is obviously one of the best hitters in baseball right now, but his fielding has a lot that's left to be desired. And when you think about Starling Marte and his regression in the field as well, you start to maybe come around on the idea that Verdugo could bring that defensive aptitude and skill that the Mets might be wanting to add more of in their outfield going forward. And listen, if they end up bringing in Verdugo, if they end up moving Marte or something happens with one of their other depth pieces, I could see Verdugo being the right fielder and just letting Juan Soto start his Mets career as a DH. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what's going to happen, but when you look at, again, what Verdugo brings and what Soto brings, they kind of balance each other. Verdugo's the very clear defensive option, and Soto's the very clear offensive option.
Yeah, I think if I was going to convince myself of why you would do this, where you would bring in Verdugo, is what it does is it allows you to use your DH spot to get your outfielders a day off their feet, but still have their bat in the lineup, right? You could move Soto into the DH role. I don't want to say on a regular basis, but semi-regularly to get him off his feet in terms of being in the field. You can do the same with Nimmo. We know he was dealing with the plantar fasciitis at the end of the season, so
Right.
there's a play there. And maybe you just want to use that. What the Mets seem to want to do with the DH spot, because there's the Luis Arraez rumors that came out the day that we're recording this podcast that they might be sniffing around there as well, is it feels like they want the DH spot to be a positional flexibility spot for them. That the person that they have at DH isn't locked into DH, kind of like last year with JD Martinez, that they want that to be somebody who can be the everyday DH, but when they need to go in the field, it can force somebody else into a day off. That's why you hear Luis Arraez, and that's what I think would be at the bottom of bringing in Alex Verdugo, is it allows you to give Soto and Nimmo days off. Whereas like last year with Soto, he either had to play in the field or that was it. Stanton was the DH. They didn't have that flexibility to maybe at a certain ballpark or against a certain team, a certain opponent, to kind of hide his defense by making him the DH. They didn't have that luxury with the Yankees. The Mets right now, because they don't have a full-time DH, they have that luxury. And so it feels like what they are trying to do is add some offense, but also give themselves some outs at the DH spot. And so if that's the idea behind it, I think I can understand. But offensively, I just don't know what you're going to get from him. He had a nearly career high walk rate last year at 7.9%. That's 49th percentile in baseball. So he's not drawing a ton of walks. He only hit 28 doubles last year. He had 3 straight 30-plus double seasons the 3 years prior. He's never hit more than 15 home runs in a season. He's never hit more than 13 home runs in a season, so you're not getting a ton of pop. So what role do you want Alex Verdugo to play here, right? The DH thing that we just outlined is fair, but we know this team's looking to add more offense, and I just don't think Verdugo provides that for you. He provides excellent defense, but it feels like you check that box with Siri and Taylor. So this, I don't want to say this is square peg round hole, because I do think there's some pros to it, but I just don't think there's enough to tell me that that's where they're going to go to fill the holes that they have on this roster.
I think, again, just to reiterate, I just think this is not necessarily anything that indicates momentum that the Mets are going to go this route. I think Verdugo is just a possible option to add increased depth if they're, not happy with where Drew Gilbert is at potentially going into next season, and they're not sure he's going to be ready, or if they're not super sold on, I don't know, Jose Siri's bat over his. Like, there are a lot of factors. Starling Marte's where he fits in on the team. There are a lot of factors. I'm gonna say I don't think that this rumor means anything is going to happen with Verdugo, like you said. But it is really interesting that the Mets are still sniffing around with corner outfielders. We've heard the Teoscar, rumor that they were offering him money. We heard the Jock Peterson thing. Obviously, Santander is a player that both of us have brought up as another potential option there. But again, Verdugo just kind of fits with the rumors that have been floating around with the Mets lately, but it's not necessarily going to happen because it's been reported.
You wanted to briefly touch on, and I think this is very important, that we're seeing it a lot across baseball today as we're recording this pod on January 9th, that a bunch of teams are signing all their guys that ahead of arbitration, and the Mets are no different. Everybody signed: Paul Blackburn, Luis Torrens, Tyrone Taylor, David Peterson, Sean Reed-Foley, Tyler McGill, Jose Siri, all signed. And we don't know all the numbers. We know the numbers on Jose Siri right now. That's $2.4 million. Sean Reed-Foley, $800,000. But they have locked up. They are not going to arbitration with any of those guys, and that's good it's good for 2 reasons. One, it now gives David Stearns a clearer picture of what actually his budget looks like right now and how much wiggle room he has. But 2, you just never want to go to arbitration with players. You have to then get in front of somebody and then talk bad about a player that 6 days later is going to be on your team. Like, it's just a bad process all across the board. So the Mets getting in front of this, not bringing any of these guys to that arbitration board, that arbitration panel, is a good thing. So we don't know the official numbers, but they get that taken care of, and that is that allows them to continue to focus on their offseason pursuits. And the offseason pursuit that we are all still waiting on, days go by, podcasts get recorded, stories get written, other players sign, and Pete Alonso is just hanging out. I don't know where he's hanging out. I don't know what he's doing, but he is hanging out contractless, teamless. He is just, the polar bear is floating in space. I didn't think polar bears could float, but that is exactly what Pete Alonso is doing right now because he's unsigned. The Mets appear to have no reason to maneuver off of their position. Do we want to discuss the erroneous Prince Fielder thing that was out there? And then, what do we want to do with that?
I don't even know what you're referring to on this one.
So
Please enlighten me.
Okay, did you see the Prince Fielder comp that was apparently floated out there a couple of days ago? Did you see this?
For Pete Alonso.
For Pete Alonso. That there was a report that Scott Boras was using Prince Fielder's 200 and whatever it was contract in talks for Pete Alonso. That he was using the $214 million deal, reportedly. Then there are reports out there that where that originated from is now no longer in the original story. So there are back and forth nature to all of this. But that was floating around for a couple days. But let's just focus on where we stand right now. And where we stand right now is Pete Alonso is unsigned. The Mets reportedly have a 3-year, $90 million offer in front of him. He does not appear interested in signing that. He clearly wants to get close to, if not to beat, the 7-year, $158 million deal that he rejected from the New York Mets. But I want to push back on one thing that I've seen a lot of. There are a lot of people that say, just sign him. Make him a forever Met. Just you have to bring him back. He misplayed his market. The Mets now don't owe it to him to now overpay him. He bet on himself. He wanted to look at the market. The market is telling him, you're not worth 7 years, $158 million. It is now not the Mets' responsibility to bridge that gap. They can put a competitive offer in front of him. Let me just say it straight up. If the 3-year, $90 million offer is true, that is a better deal than he's going to get anywhere else. So the Mets are still overpaying. They are overpaying what the market is. They're giving him $30 million a season. They are overpaying what the going rate for first baseman is because they want to bring Pete Alonso back. If he chooses to not want to engage on that contract offer, then if Pete goes someplace else, I'm not going to lose a single ounce of sleep over it. The Mets are doing everything that they are supposed to do for their franchise. They have put a very fair competitive offer reportedly in front of Pete Alonso. If he chooses to not take it, the Mets do not need to go to a 4th year. They do not need to go to a 5th year. They do not need to go to $150 million. They have an offer in front of him that is better than any offer that has been given out to a free agent first baseman yet this offseason. They would be resetting the market at first base by doing this deal. So if he chooses to reject it, the Mets are doing what they are supposed to do.
Yeah, you really said it all right there. And look, everything that is going on right now with the first baseman market seems to indicate that eventually Pete's going to end up back with the Mets, right? There aren't a lot of other options for first baseman, which the Mets need. Again, they could move Mark Vientos, but the base level facts are this. The Mets need a first baseman. Pete is obviously still the best one available. And also Pete doesn't have any options really left of other potential suitors. And I think him and his agent, Scott Boras, really want the Mets to be the ones to blink in this negotiation. But there's, like you said, and like we've said for a couple episodes now, there's no reason for them to do that. Like, he has obviously the goodwill of the fans and the franchise for what he has brought, but the numbers are the numbers. And over the last few years, the truth is he's been regressing a little bit. The power has not been quite where it was as a rookie or even, in his 3rd year. I won't count 2020, but there's no reason to bring in a first baseman who is 30 years old, going to be 31 and in his early 30s for the entire contract, and overpay him. Like you said, that AAV for 3 years, $90 million, $30 million a year is more than he's going to get from any other team on a AAV basis. Sure, it's not the length he wants. Sure, it's not the total value that he wants, but make the most of what you can get. And again, if he's able to prove himself for the next 3 years or however long on a shorter term deal with high AAV, he'll hit the market again and be able to reap the earnings of that. But we've seen it in the past with guys like Albert Pujols and the Angels contract that he got, and Jose Abreu and what happened when he went to Houston. First basemen and their power can age poorly very quickly. Yeah. And Pete Alonso has been a fantastic, stalwart of the Mets first base for the last 6 years. He's been a consistent player, nearly everyday player. But if the Mets don't feel like he's worth giving out a long-term contract for a high value, I trust David Stearns. I'm sorry, but I think there's no reason again to go all in on a guy that you're not fully convinced is going to be the same player that he was to start his career. And again, he doesn't have many other options right now.
There's also no reason to outbid yourself. And there's also no reason to rush this when Alex Bregman's still out there.
Right.
Nolan Arenado, one of the places he's willing to accept a trade to reportedly is the Mets. There are other options for them if they want to move Vientos to first base to put somebody at third. Luis Arraez can play a bunch of different positions on the infield. The Mets are under zero pressure to do this. You know who's under all the pressure? Pete. And so if Pete wants to drag this out, fine. I would like Pete back in a New York Met uniform. I don't necessarily love the 3-year $90 million, but it is a short-term commitment, so I can tolerate having a $30 million first baseman who I think truthfully is the fourth or fifth offensive option for this team, where when you're getting paid that amount, you're probably supposed to be the number one or number two offensive option. I just don't understand Mets fans, and maybe there are people that listen to this pod that are in this camp, but I just don't understand why you feel the Mets have to go above and beyond where they're already going. This is the biggest first base contract that would be given out this offseason. So the Mets are already beating the market. This would be more than what Christian Walker got. Walker got 3 years, 60. This would be more than any of the Paul Goldschmidt. You name the first baseman. This would be more than any of those guys got. So if he doesn't want to take it, the Mets are under no obligation to be like, oh, then we'll make it $110 million. They're under zero obligation to do that. They have to do what is right for their baseball team. They put a fair offer in front of Pete Alonso, and they're just going to sit back and wait because Nolan Arenado is still out there. Alex Bregman is still out there. There are other options for them if they need to pivot, and they clearly have a cap on this is what we think you're worth. This is what the market is saying you're worth, and we'll leave it at that. So if Pete wants to continue to drag this on, that's his right. I just don't know what this looks like because I wonder if we get to a place where 390 is no longer on the table in 2 weeks. And then it's really advantageous for the Mets.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where we stand right now. A bunch of rumors, not a lot of activity. The Mets are apparently still in pursuit of starting pitching. We wait for Roki Sasaki to make his decision. We know they're looking at a reliever. They met with Tanner Scott, so that's something to keep an eye on, and they have to solve this Pete Alonso offense issue that they have. And I think Pete or no Pete, there's another offensive player that is coming into the fold. So we wanted to just get back onto a normal schedule, get back into your podcast feed. So we will be back on our normal podcast schedule probably at the beginning of next week, Monday. We will be back with our normal, regularly scheduled episode. But we wanted to get back with you guys, get you updated on all the rumors, Pete Alonso drama, everything in between. And then we will be back with our regularly scheduled programming next week. So appreciate everybody who listens to this pod. Please rate, review, subscribe. I think I mentioned it the last time we talked to you guys, but December, the best month since we took over this podcast feed. We're hoping to continue that trend into 2025, and that is thanks in part to all of you. So please rate, review, subscribe, share the show. Does us a great it's a great service for us if you were able to share the show with fellow Mets fans and people that you think would enjoy the content. So everybody, enjoy the rest of your week. We'll be back with our normally scheduled programming on Monday. And as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.